encompassing a spiritual and social event that will be galvanizing and allow people to see a way into the future, which they don't see now. There's so much hopelessness. And that will dissolve like a PowerPoint presentation dissolves. Boom. And this other image will come forward. That's what we have to put forward, and we can do it. Well, thank you very much. This is a few introductory comments I wanted to make. And I would like to answer any questions people may have. I have a website, arrow2012.com, if you want to read that. We have a business plan or a proposal. I don't like to call it a business plan. That's so trite. It's really not that. It's a strategic overview plan that has the $43 million budget attached. But I'd like to answer any questions because I just wanted to introduce them.
Will this talk be recorded?
I don't know if they've successfully recorded it. They told me it is. It's supposed to be on the internet.
These cameras, just so you know, are for Todd and
they're going to load it on the internet.
hosts to be able to put up online.
Yes.
The cameras can be
yes,
turned
ma'am.
off, though, or you can ask any private questions.
Nancy, you have a question?
I was having a little trouble with understanding when you say it's out there. Was a lot of this technology developed in the black world, and so it's a question of getting it out so the rest of us have access to it?
No. Well, yes and no. There have been classified projects dealing with this for many, many decades,
right,
going back before World War II, in fact. However, there have also been individual white world inventors, scientists, even entire research teams that have had these systems and developed them to the point where they were stable, functioning prototypes. Normally what then happens is that someone comes along and says, well, let me help you, wink, wink. And they will offer them X number of dollars in order to then take possession of that technology, which then ends up on a black shelf at General Motors or GE or Westinghouse or Lockheed.
That part I understand.
Yeah.
I guess
So,
what I'm trying to understand is if you have functioning models today, why can't you get... let me just ask you, on YouTube, which I've never seen, but I am just overwhelmed by what appears to be the power of getting the message out to the millions. As you
we know those folks. And what my point is that we have the Disclosure Project video up there. It's being seen millions and millions and millions of times, like a fractal.
Right.
But yes, what I'm saying is that we're just now that have identified in the last couple of years the people, the scientists who are still living, who have these systems. This week is the launch of Arrow. So that's what we're in the what you're asking is exactly where we're at the stage of doing. But you have to build a strategic vehicle to do it. You have to have a strategic network to plug in a system so that it carries the technology. In the past, and I can tell you this, right now on Earth, in our portfolio of identified systems, there's between 100 and 200. We'd have to count them. I'd have to look at them again. Scientists and engineers who have some iteration of these technologies. And they have been kind of working isolated. And so what we're now at the stage of doing is putting together a strategic group. We have the strategic group, but the funding mechanism to then identify the best of these and then bring them out on a large-scale basis.
I suggest that you consider getting an additional team that can look at how you deal with the transition from the way we do stuff now to this new capability.
We've already done that. We've already created the white papers and the analysis of how to do that.
So you understand who gets hurt by the change.
Of course.
And then you start figuring out how you deal with them.
Yes, because many of those we've already met with starting in the mid and late 90s, and we've been bringing them along. That's what I was discussing, to say, here's how you can benefit. Here's the tide that can lift all ships.
Right.
And it's sort of like Olivetti typewriters. I mean, they went bankrupt a couple years ago because they didn't get on board the computer and word processing wagon. So at a certain point, yes, it's in their own enlightened self-interest to do this. But because of the dynamic that they've been able to keep a monopolistic lock on this, that until that breaks forward, they don't really have much incentive to jump on board with you. But yes, we've already analyzed that. There have been very in-depth discussions that our team has already had with some of the
on your website?
Some of the financial and governmental and corporate.
I'm interested
groups.
in how you manage the transition because I think that's incredibly hard. I mean, that's where the resistance is. I mean, if you talk to people who are talking about wanting to have the hydrogen car, whatever,
Right.
how do you basically get it distributed around the country so people can have access to it? I mean, the logistics issues related to this are...
Oh, you're talking about logistics.
Well, I think the logistics issues related to any new technology today are really
Huge.
quite...
Yes. And this is the
enormous.
biggest one ever. Well, you're going to have to, first of all, let people know it exists, and then have the ability, both financially and strategically, to move them to the point-of-use consumer. And that is something that you have to control initially.
But imagine from the manufacturing standpoint, if you could look at some of these places where they're laying off people with manufacturing skills,
Right.
and you could say, well, we ought to go in here and create jobs. I mean, if you think about it, rather than the technology alone, but how it fits into a much bigger system.
Well, we have. I mean, this, of course. I mean, I'm not covering everything that we've thought about in the last 17 years, but this has all been looked at very, very carefully. And it certainly can be done. And actually, there's a lot of, even in the United States, but never mind worldwide, there's a way underuse of capital and facilities, and human capital, labor.
Right.
I mean, most of the world, after all, half the world lives on, what, $2 a day? There's enormous capability. And I'll point something else out, because some people say, well, you know, this creates a problem because there will be too many people using technology. You have the ability to have, and this gentleman had been involved in recycling and was one of the pioneers, if you have, quote, free energy from the quantum vacuum, you can scrub 100% of the effluent from any smokestack or emission into a waterway. You can recycle 100%, because right now we have the means to do that. What's rate limiting is that the energy related to it is expensive, and you reach the point of diminishing return. So there will be entire industries that will be stood up at second and third and fourth order ramifications of this. It's enormous, and we know that. And so what you have today is a, you know, what, 30 to 40 trillion dollar world economy. That will grow to 100 and 200 trillion dollar world economy. And with that, you will have the ability to then not have 50% of the world's population living on $2 a day. And you will also have the ability to have complete recycling in a clean environment as a consequence, and the utilization of a lot of the industrial capacity that right now, in the Rust Belt, as they call it, and throughout America, has been outsourced to other places. So this is, I mean, so there's a lot of win-win-win situations, and I like to focus on that, and I think you're correct to point it out, rather than who's losing. Because really, the folks, you know, I mean, obviously, if you own $1 trillion oil and natural gas field, this may not be the greatest news for you. But if you've already extracted hundreds of trillions of dollars and you got it sitting out there, who cares? It really becomes about geopolitical power. And I think the strategic issues, which is what I'm focusing on, is what is overlooked. The issue isn't about money. Money to you and me is, can I, you know, I have one daughter at Yale, one going to Stanford Law School, and one, I mean, you know, I have a big nut to crack here just for college tuition. That's what money means to me. But if you're talking about controlling multi-hundred trillion dollars worth of assets, that's about geopolitical power and how the world runs and who runs it. That's what their currency is. That's the real currency. And so that's why it's been so difficult to get this out. If it was just conventional thinking and conventional business concerns, this would not be difficult. It's a much larger issue. But obviously the transition, and I agree with you, that the transition to this is something that has to wisely be done so it's as least disruptive as possible, and is actually something that creates a win-win-win situation for most of society. We can't gloss over the fact, however, that once these begin to really become applied by the hundreds of millions of units and around the world, that the price of commodities such as oil and gas and natural coal will abate and eventually become, well, you know, it costs $2 or $3 to pull a barrel of oil out of the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, and it's selling for 72. So that, you know, it's great profit potential. But I think many of those countries are going to have to understand, and families, it's really the families of these countries, that we have an opportunity here to do something that would pull the whole world forward. And even in those sectors their enlightened self-interest long-term